The British Empire is dead, at least that's what the history books tell us. The age of colonialism ended decades ago, right? Well, not exactly. Because in 2026, the sun still hasn't set on British territory. There are 14 territories flying the Union Jack, millions living under the British Crown, and Commonwealth realms stretching from the Caribbean to the Pacific. So what's actually left of the British Empire? The answer might surprise you. Let's rewind for a moment. At its peak in the 1920s, the British Empire was the largest empire in human history. It controlled roughly a quarter of the world's land and governed about 450 million people. From Canada to India, from Australia to Kenya, vast stretches of the globe were painted red on the map. But empires don't last forever. After World War II, Britain was exhausted and bankrupt. The costs of maintaining such a massive empire became impossible, and independence movements were gaining strength everywhere. India gained independence in 1947, and that started a domino effect. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, colony after colony broke free. By the 1990s, even Hong Kong was handed back to China. The empire, it seemed, was finished. But here's the thing. Britain never completely let go. Pieces of that empire remain scattered across the globe, and they tell a fascinating story about power, strategy, and how empires transform rather than disappear. Today, Britain still directly controls 14 territories known as British Overseas Territories. These aren't colonies anymore, at least not officially. The people living there are British citizens, they elect their own governments, but Britain handles their defense and foreign affairs. Let's talk about the most important ones. Gibraltar, that tiny rock at the southern tip of Spain, has been British since 1713. It guards the entrance to the Mediterranean, and despite Spain wanting it back for centuries, the Gibraltarians voted overwhelmingly to remain British in referendums, most recently in 2002. Then there are the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic. Argentina claims them as the Malvinas, but the 3,500 islanders consider themselves British. Britain even fought a war over these islands in 1982, and in a 2013 referendum, 99.8% voted to stay British. That's not a typo, just 3 people voted against. In the Caribbean, you'll find the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Turks and Caicos. These tiny territories have become financial powerhouses, tax havens that manage billions of dollars. They remain British partly because of the economic benefits and partly because they're too small to be fully independent. And then there's St. Helena, one of the most remote inhabited islands on Earth, sitting alone in the South Atlantic. It's where Napoleon was exiled and died. Today, fewer than 4,000 people live there, and they remain proudly British. But perhaps the most fascinating British territory is Pitcairn Island. Located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, it's one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. The population? Just around 35 people. Yes, you heard that right. This is Britain's smallest territory, settled by the mutineers from HMS Bounty in 1790. Their descendants still live there today, speaking a unique blend of English and Tahitian. Britain continues to govern this tiny speck of land, even though it costs far more to administer than it could ever generate in revenue. It's a perfect symbol of how the empire's logic doesn't always make practical sense anymore. But the overseas territories are just the beginning. Let's talk about something even stranger. There are 15 countries where King Charles III is still the official head of state, not ceremonially in the past tense, but right now in 2026. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Papua New Guinea, and several other Caribbean and Pacific nations are all Commonwealth realms. They're fully independent countries with their own governments, but they share the British monarch as their king. The Governor-General represents him in each country, and technically, laws still require royal assent. Think about how unusual this is. Canada, the second largest country on Earth, has a British king on its currency and as its head of state. Australia, over 15,000 kilometers from London, still hasn't become a republic. The Commonwealth itself is even larger, with 56 member countries. Most don't have the king as head of state anymore, but they maintain historical, cultural, and economic ties to Britain. It's not an empire in the traditional sense, but it's certainly a network of influence. But the empire's legacy isn't just about territory and crowns, it's woven into the fabric of our modern world in ways you might not realize. English is the global language largely because of the British Empire. Common law, the legal system used in Britain, shapes how justice works in dozens of countries today. Borders drawn by British colonial administrators, often with complete disregard for ethnic or cultural groups, still cause conflicts from Africa to the Middle East. Sports like cricket and rugby spread through the empire and remained hugely popular in former colonies. Even driving on the left side of the road in places like India, Australia, and Kenya is an imperial leftover. The empire didn't just disappear, it transformed into cultural, linguistic, and institutional influence that continues today. So, what's left of the British Empire in 2026? 14 territories, from tiny Pitcairn with its 35 residents to strategic Gibraltar. 15 realms with a British king as head of state, a Commonwealth of 56 nations. But more than that, it's a language, a legal system, borders, and institutions that shape how billions of people live. The British Empire didn't disappear, it just changed shape, and in ways visible and invisible, its shadow still stretches across the world. The sun may have set on the Empire's glory days, but somehow, on British territory somewhere, it still hasn't set at all.